Welcome to the Temple of Geek Podcast. My name is Monica, and I will be your host as we discuss the first two episodes of the latest Marvel Studios series, Ms. Marvel. If you haven't caught up on the first two episodes, you may want to save this episode for later because there will be spoilers. If this is your first time tuning into the Temple of Geek Podcast, welcome. The Temple of Geek Podcast has been around since 2012 and is hosted by a variety of geeks from the Temple of Geek team. Here we cover all manner of geek and pop culture news and events. To our returning listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate you being here. Returning to the podcast today is our Temple of Geek contributor, Kristen, as well as friend of the podcast, Maria. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here. Can you guys briefly introduce yourselves to our listeners and tell them a little bit about you?
Hi, you guys may know me from TikTok and my Bridgerton episode. My TikTok handle is Call Me By The Same Maria. I'm a film enthusiast, fandom lover, and TV is my whole personality. So if you like overanalysis and hyperfixating on fandom culture, you should follow me. And yeah, I'm so excited to talk about these episodes. This is everything.
Awesome. I agree. And I think the way that you describe yourself about, being all about fandom, that's exactly why you're here and with us on Temple of Geek. As Monica said, I'm a contributor with Temple of Geek. I have written a few articles. I've hosted a couple episodes of the podcast. I am always down to chat fandom with Monica or anybody else on this team because, as I kind of joke to other people, like I am like a full-time fangirl. Whatever my actual day-to-day job is, fangirl's pretty solid throughout. So I'm also just really excited to talk about Ms. Marvel. Very excited to see where the rest of the show goes.
Well, thank you guys for being here. And then also, I just thought about it when I was seeing you guys side by side on the screen. All three of us are really big Good Place fans. Yeah. So it's kind of a nice thing that we have in common there. But anyways. All right. So
that's another episode.
Yeah, that's a whole nother episode.
No, we can get into that for sure.
Yep.
So before we get started, I kind of want to hear a bit about your Marvel history. When did you discover the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Are you familiar with the Ms. Marvel comics, or is this your first introduction to this character?
So I think I saw the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. So I think that's like my earliest probably introduction to Marvel in general, probably with a lot of other millennials my age, if you weren't like a comic book reader, right? And then I think it was like when the MCU started coming out, it really wasn't until I think the first Avengers films that I really started getting interested. So while I consider myself a Marvel fan, I have not gone back and like watched all of the MCU movies. I don't have as much interest, say, in like the Iron Man films, but it's like the ones I love. So like Captain America was like, I am there when it comes out, Infinity War, I think we went to like that opening weekend, and Endgame and cried, the entire time for both of those. And so, yeah, I think that's probably another whole, again, podcast episode about what makes a fan and how you define your fandom and what counts, etc. And I digress. But Ms. Marvel for me was kind of my first introduction into reading comics. Like I read manga and stuff and in middle school and high school. That's a deep cut. But in terms of like a superhero comic, Ms. Marvel was my introduction to comic book world, essentially. The differences between issues and volumes and the trades, which I still don't fully understand all of that lingo. It can feel very intimidating. But I think starting with Ms. Marvel, who was a new character in 2014, she was very accessible, in my opinion. And also, I just liked the idea of her story and that she was groundbreaking. She was pioneering in a character. So that's how I got into it. And then I kind of just got hooked and stayed with her whole run. So when they announced that they were doing a series, I was very excited. But yeah, that's I guess, my roundabout way. What about you,
It's very similar. I'm also not a comic book reader. I've read some DC comics, but I guess I grew up with X-Men, the animated show. So I was always an X-Men fan. But when it comes to the MCU, Spider-Man, Tobey Maguire Spider-Man was my first, I think, if X-Men didn't come before that. But I'm not sure if that franchise I definitely followed. And then whenever the MCU started releasing the Iron Man movies and doing all of Phase 1, that is when I started investing more in Marvel. So I have actually seen all of the movies as they came out in the past like decade when they were slowly coming out, and that's what really got me to become an actual Marvel fan, because before that I was like DC and was like kind of skeptical, but the MCU really introduced all of the characters and started to fall in love with all of them and invest, but wasn't really sure where to start comic book wise. But then I heard about Miss Marvel, and much like you, I just felt like, okay, this seems less intimidating. It was a newer series, and I also was very aware about her origin, her background, and well, she's a Pakistani Muslim superhero. I'm a Pakistani Muslim immigrant growing in America.
Also superhero?
I mean,
or?
I can't tell you that. Yeah, that's another podcast. But yeah, so obviously invested in her story. Also couldn't believe her story even existed, because it was the first time a superhero remotely resembled me. So very interested in her story in general. But then the comic book, it also seemed like something that I could take on. So I haven't started reading the comic books yet, but I want to and will. I was actually looking up the editions yesterday, and I was trying to figure out which one came first, where to start, like which is a series, which volume, like all of that too. So
yeah, I think we all have kind of similar stories as far as our MCU introductions. I grew up on the animated series. I was a kid when that came out, and I had cousins who went to the comic book stores once a week, so I would pick up like a comic along with them. I read the Wolverine comics as a kid, but do I remember all of it? Do I even have them? No, but my cousin was buying a comic. I wanted a comic too. Like,
of course.
and but I really didn't understand a lot about Marvel outside of X-Men, the animated series, and the little bit of the Wolverine comics that I read. And I think I was 22 when the Tobey Maguire movie came out. So I was a full-on adult, and most of my life, the only thing I had really seen was Batman movies. Back when I was younger, there was like not a lot of stuff out there. We got a couple Batman movies every once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
In 2008, when the Iron Man movie came out, I had a 4-year-old who I was like, I'm going to go take him to see this Iron Man thing. I don't know what it is, right? Well, my 4-year-old became obsessed with Iron Man, which means I had to buy all the Iron Man books and read them at bedtime. I had to buy everything Iron Man. And so, I think he and I came into the Marvel Cinematic Universe together. And because I was always taking my kid to the next movie, I started becoming a fan. And I just fed into his like obsession for Iron Man and these Marvel movies. And then we met, my partner, Nate, who 2010. And so he just fed our like obsession that we already had. And he was like, let's go to Comic-Con. Let's go here. Let's cosplay. Let's do all these family cosplays and let's do all of these things. And so as a little family, the Marvel Cinematic Universe was this one thing that we like bonded over a lot. That and Doctor Who, like geeky stuff, really. But I've been very in deep to the Marvel Cinematic Universe ever since. I don't think I've ever missed an opening night.
Yeah, it's impressive.
I'm pretty sure I haven't, but like I said, people are enabling me in my household.
It's good. They're encouraging.
It's a good enabling.
It's positive peer pressure.
And so now, here we are. Miss Marvel, I know very little about. I had a couple years ago when it came out, I had a young cousin who I would take to Comic-Con with me, and I would help her hunt down the comics for Miss Marvel, because apparently the physical copies were harder to get for whatever reason. Not everybody's, had them. So we would run around, all the different conventions trying to get her physical copies. And she would tell me about Miss Marvel, but I didn't really know a lot. But at the time, she was about maybe 14. So I think it just really resonated with her. So she was really into it. And that's all I know about Miss Marvel. And I'm kind of, when it comes to comics, I'm very intimidated by them. But also there's so many iterations of them that I kind of stay to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like, I want Kevin Feige to tell me his story. You know what I mean? Like, I'm willing to not look at the comics and just enjoy the movies for what they are and what they're giving them to me outside of the comics. But anyways, all right. So for our listeners who may not be familiar with the series, Marvel Studios' Miss Marvel is a new original series that introduces Kamala Khan, a Muslim American teenager growing up in Jersey City, an avid gamer and ferocious fan fiction scribe. Kamala is a superhero mega fan with an oversized imagination, particularly when it comes to Captain Marvel. Yet Kamala feels like she doesn't fit in at school and sometimes even at home, and that is until she gets superpowers like the heroes she's always looked up to. The series stars Iman Vellani as the titular character. So, before we go into any deep dives, I just want to get a general reaction from you about the first 2 episodes.
Maria, do you want to go
Yes,
first?
I definitely loved it. I wish I could have watched it twice, but for the series. But I just remember smiling so hard the whole time and just being like, "Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god!" And just a lot of excitement. So I know that I loved all of it. Whatever it was, I loved it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was definitely, in some ways, not quite what I expected, but in a good way, because I think this is kind of I guess, a large topic, getting slightly off topic, but with the other Disney Plus Marvel series, I think they all have their own tone and style. When you look at WandaVision, it's very different than Loki, for instance. And so I think like Miss Marvel achieved that as well, while getting it, like honoring the comics and just Kamala's like creativity herself and really feeding that into the whole show. And just oh my god, she's a delight. I just love
adorable.
Her. Yeah, I was like, I want to adopt her. She's my child. But it's just, yeah, it's so great. I'm so excited to see where it goes and just to finish off the rest of the season. And can't wait for the next.
I really liked how young the series was, because especially compared to the rest of the MCU series that we've had so far, this is like, it actually, I mean, she's in high school, but it feels like she's in high school, and it's just a fresh.
It's a breath of
yes,
fresh air.
Exactly, fresh energy too. So I loved it.
Yes, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole time, like you said, smiling ear to ear. I couldn't believe how much I was smiling while I was watching it. And then on top of that, like, I have an 18-year-old. So like, I just kept looking at her as if like, oh my God, she could be my daughter. And I was like, the whole time I was like, I want a girl. I didn't get a girl. Like, I want a daughter, like just like her. And then I don't know what Disney Plus is doing to me, because the same thing happened to me last week with Kenobi with the series.
Well, that's because Leia's adorable, though. The cutest little kid ever. So that's not,
Disney is just like being really great about casting like the most adorable like young people and just being like, yep.
Yeah.
So
yeah, so
I don't know, man. She is so cute. She is so adorable, and my whole general reaction to the first 2 episodes was like, oh, I love her. And that's it. Like, I just love.
It's funny how you were like, oh my God, that could be my kid. I was like, that's me. That's how I was when I was younger. This is me. So it's very much like opposite reaction, but that's also why I loved it, because I was just like, I wish I had this growing up. I'm so excited to see this now. It is just like, retroactively, this is so cool to watch. So
yeah, I think like the fact that, sorry, Monica, but I think like the fact that you're saying that now, that you like, you wish you had that when you're growing up, and you're like, that was me, that that there are 16-year-olds, there are 14-year-olds, there are kids in high school or in middle school just like seeing Kamala and just being like, yeah, she's me, or I want to be her.
I want to be as cool as her,
because
that wasn't as cool as her. I wish I was that cool.
Oh no. Was anyone? No. She's too cool.
And I think like for those of us who are avid convention goers and we go to like Comic-Con and all these different events, to see this character who's such like a fangirl, and I think that resonates with all the Marvel fans, at least. I don't want to speak for all the Marvel fans, but I think that's something that all Marvel fans can like really like resonate with, is the fact that she is a fan, and it's so endearing. It really, really is.
It's like made for the Marvel fandom, the generation that grew up watching it. It's almost like a tribute to like see.
Yeah, a love letter to us. Yeah,
absolutely. Based on the trailer alone, were the first 2 episodes what you expected?
So I don't remember all of the trailer, but it wasn't what I was expecting because the trailer was a lot. There was so much going on. I wasn't sure where the story was going to go, but I'm happy with where the story is going because it feels very origin story of a superhero. So
yeah, like you, I can't remember the trailer off the top of my head, except that I was excited for it. Like I was like, oh, again, I think I was like that younger, like fresh energy, you know, coming off of something like Loki or the ending of WandaVision or, you know, some of the others. It's like, I want something a little bit more fun.
yeah, no, it's
you know,
super
like
fun.
Hawkeye was fun.
Yeah.
You know, it was like, oh, Hawkeye got like that fun energy back for me that I was like, I just want to be happy.
Yeah, seriously.
So I think that's what that was kind of like my takeaways. And yeah, I think like one thing, I think like kind of a bit of the style they might have hinted at, or like a hint of some of the changes compared to like the comics. It was like, oh, okay, it looks like they're going in that kind of a direction. But like you said, I think in terms of like starting it off, I'm like, no, in terms of actually watching the episodes, I think again, it's like I'm still just excited to see where it goes next.
I do remember that they hinted at like the pop art and like the little doodles and everything, and I thought it was cute in the trailer, but I didn't realize how well and how much they utilized it to the point that I didn't even notice it, but at the same time I did, and it was so well incorporated and makes it much more fun, but also just adds a level to her personality and relationships. So they're utilizing that part really well, which is really cool to see.
I think it really reminded me of Into the Spider-Verse with Miles Morales. You know, like really like reminding you this is a comic show or this is a comic book movie, and we're going to honor that medium. So,
but in like such an accessible way. It's like not like bubble letters. It's like text messages. So it feels like we are comic books. So
yeah.
I think it's a really nice marriage of the two, like, you know, modern technology, you know, texting, things like that, and then the comic book stuff. And then I also really, it reminded me a lot of Juno, because Juno has like this very cartoony way that it like starts off in. So I kept getting Juno vibes because maybe it's like funny, witty, like young characters, you know? So, yeah, I don't know. I really like the animation and everything. What do you think of the way that they introduced this new character, and what are your thoughts on her as a character?
So I guess going off the animation style, I also like that we get to see her mindset, like the daydreams and how she, I really feel like they're really good at showing her personality without doing a lot of exposition. So I really like the way they're introducing the character. She seems a lot of fun. She seems really dynamic. I'm really interested to get to know her more too.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't quite think about that, but I do. The illustrations and stuff are very indicative of her and what she's thinking and kind of like driving that story and that energy forward. Yeah, again, I just thought she was a delight. You know, Iman was just so perfect as Kamala. There were a couple moments as my friend and I were talking that it's one of those, sometimes when it comes to like coming of age shows and movies, I'm starting to side with the parents a little bit more. And I'm like, what does that say about me? So sometimes I'm like, I don't know, your mom and dad sound right. So I'm like, that could just be a whole separate conversation. But otherwise, like, it was just very sweet and, you know, relatable in the sense that, yes, she's a nerd and she's a bit of a geek, but I feel like it wasn't anything that's like a negative. It's her parents don't fully understand her passion. But she has her friends that, you know, she has Bruno that like help her through it. You know, she's got like her online friends and everything. So I think that like she has her support and no one looks down on her for all of her passions and her love. It's just she just likes that thing. We don't quite get it, but you know, so I also really appreciate it.
And I also felt like they are really good at showing how she's still trying to figure out how to express herself, and her parents are also trying to understand her. I definitely related to it. I also feel like they're trying to hint at the whole like cultural generation gap, and they're both in the right. Like I agree with the parents, and I saw them trying, especially with like that one scene with the Comic-Con costumes. I thought that was really cute, especially with their dad, and I was like all about it.
I wish my dad would do that.
But like I get her embarrassment at the same time because it's like she worked so hard. How is she going to tell them she worked so hard without getting in trouble. So it's like they're both in the right, but they're just trying to figure out how to communicate with each other. And of all things about superheroes, something that our parents probably have no idea. And how do you describe superheroes when you're not like growing up in the MCU? So I appreciated both sides. For sure.
Yeah.
As I hear the two of you talk, and I kept saying, oh, I want a daughter like this. And then as I hear you talk, I'm like, oh my gosh, that was me. Because, you know, I'm a first generation kid. There's a very big cultural difference between my parents and me. And when I wanted to go to things, they were just so overprotective and just did not. They were like, they didn't understand. And then I never got made fun of for being a geek or nerdy or really passionate about things, but it wasn't something that anybody really understood until I was like an adult and was able to like meet my own friends who had the same kind of mindset. So it wasn't something where like they teased me or anything like that, but it was like, oh, she's a little weird. Like, oh, and it was like tolerated, you know, it's like, oh, it's her quirky thing. So now that you guys say that, I'm like, oh, she does kind of remind me a little of younger me.
Especially what you said about like her parents trying to be protective. Like you can see that with Kamalas' parents. I definitely see with my parents, like they may not understand my like hyperfixation on TV shows and like fandoms, but it's because they were worried that like, oh, you know, like what are you going to do with yourself? Are you going to focus on this the rest of your life? And it's like, no, this is a side thing. You can have like hobbies and then, you know, still be a career, like be successful in this world. So definitely resonated with me a lot.
Yeah.
And I think that when you come from like an immigrant household, like they don't understand hobbies because they never had the opportunity to have these hobbies. It's been like work, 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 and dedicating their lives to like just putting food on the table and getting through and like, you know, making sure their kids are okay. And then they get their kids okay and their kids have this leisure time and this freedom, and it's just a different understanding, a different world that they came into.
Yeah, and I really hope they touch on that because the immigrant experience is definitely very similar, but there's also with the South Asian community, there's this like running hustle culture in the sense that like there's been a lot of changes that they had to go through, but they did it all for like this hope that our kids will have a better life. So they hinted at this with her mother's story about how she had to like move with the partition, and because of that, she's a little bit more scared and more like worried about Kamala and has like history with it going awry. And I mean, my parents don't even talk about this. So like, I'm excited to see them like address this and talk about how that can affect that generation and then moving to America and how it just, you know, affects parenting and that relationship. So I'm excited to see what they do with that.
Yeah, I agreed.
I watched it. What you said now just kind of reminded me of a stand-up special that Aziz Ansari did, where he asked his mother asked him like, do you ever have moments where you're like so stressed out and you don't know what to do, or you're so down, or life is just so hard? And he's like, no. He was like, no. He's like, one time I didn't have like Wi-Fi on like the internet. He's like, I don't know how to connect with you because you've had real struggles and like you've made my life so easy that I don't know how to connect with that kind of trauma that you have.
I want to watch the special now.
It's really funny. He talks about his parents a lot, which is really great. And like, you know, when his dad came to this country and stuff, and it's very funny. He knows how to make like a sensitive subject very like light, and you know. So let's get into her relationship with her friends and her family. What did you guys think of her friends and the people that are around her?
So
were there any were there any standout characters or scenes that you thought were really important to note?
So a lot of what her mom would say to her reminded me a lot of stuff that I've heard in the past. So I thought it was her mom and her like relationship with her mother is very interesting. And I'm not sure what the relationship with her mother is in the comic books and if it's similar. But I like the way they're going with this because I think it's like a lot of stuff that they can unpack with, you know, the generation, what they went through, all the baggage that comes with everything that comes with their lives. So she stood out for me already.
Yeah, I love her parents. I love her mom. I think one thing that I feel like maybe a slight difference, but it's been some time since I've read the comics. I have to reread them. But I felt like there was a bit more like Kamala feeling that pressure of like, but I can't disappoint my parents. And I didn't feel that quite as much in the show, except for the whole not wanting to ask them to like drive her to AvengerCon, but I also could just be projecting because it was one of those, like, I would hate asking for things like, Mom or Dad, can you take me to the mall to meet with my friends? Because it's like that pressure of being like, I don't want to trouble them because they're busy, or like, I don't want to disappoint them in some way. You know, it's like all that self-imposed things in some way that it's like, whether it's not externalized by your parents in any way, it's like, I think in the upbringing of wanting to make your parents proud, I'm projecting. This is a whole therapy session.
That's so fair because that's what resonates with it.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's why I think that's what I love about their relationship. And, you know, even if I don't necessarily have the same background as Kamala, it's like I see those threads that make it relatable. And I'm like, yep, that was life in high school when you didn't have a driver's license, when you couldn't drive.
My parents didn't let me get my driver's
license. Dad, what
my
can I
parents
do?
didn't let me get my driver's license. So yeah, that was like all of teenage life. So I do agree. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say that I agree that like it's something that we can definitely relate to and wish we saw. But I kind of like that she's a little bit like of a rebel and just does her thing. It's like
she's a little more assertive. I think.
I like this fresh take on like a character a personality trait that we usually see a lot when it comes to immigrants or South Asian characters. So I'm happy that she's kind of a rebel and does her thing. I'm happy with the choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that I really like is that her parents aren't villainized in any way. It's just a very normal kind of relationship. I think sometimes in coming-of-age shows or coming-of-age films, you do get where like the parents are keeping, you know, the kid from something they really want, and they're made kind of the villain. So I'm glad that her parents are not villainized, but they are an obstacle, right? But it's just a normal kind of very like understood teenager thing. The other thing that I really thought was great was her relationship with her friends. Seems very wholesome. I don't know. The relationship that they have seems very sweet and wholesome.
Oh,
and the relationship she has with Bruno is also very like wholesome and sweet. Although I did get a lot of in the second episode, I got a lot of 16 Candle vibes when he's out by the car and then Bruno runs out, and I was like, oh, this is like,
oh yeah,
Ducky like trying to stop like this girl. I don't know.
That's a great reference.
It just kind of reminded me of 16 Candles.
Mm-hmm. I really like Nadia, and I'm happy that we get to see more of her in the second episode. She seems like such a cool character that like I would be okay with like just watching her storyline because she's doing a lot. So I'm excited about that character.
Yeah, because I think like in the first episode for me, I was like, I feel like we're not getting much about her. So I do kind of hope we see a little bit more as we see that relationship develop more.
And then just from the first two episodes, because this feels very basic origin story, we don't see any like real bad guys yet. Like we don't really know what she'll be up against, right? Mm-hmm. And so it kind of is giving me a little bit of the Moon Knight vibes with like the pacing as far as like really getting to know this character and what they're about before we see their action-packed like journey into like, you know, being a superhero. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of excited to see her character, all their characters, the friends, the families, like their storylines more fleshed out. But I am excited to kind of spend more time with these little subtle things like, you know, going to a Comic-Con and things like that.
Yeah.
I didn't consider what the bad guy would be because I forgot about that.
Yeah.
So because we're in like the business of like knowing superhero things, obviously we know she's going to return in the Marvels, which I'm still not over that title. I don't know what it is about the Marvels that just makes me giggle and like the Marvels, like anyway,
not just one, not just two, but three,
all of them.
It just I don't know what it is about that like gets me so happy. But anyways, we know we're gonna see her in the Marvels. So when do we see Carol Danvers like show up in this series? Is she gonna show up in the series, or does she not meet until the movie? Like, I'm trying to overthink so that it doesn't like kind of taint the experience of like just watching the show. But knowing she's gonna be out there, I'm just like, so where does she finally meet Carol Danvers?
I wouldn't be surprised if it's in the series because Marvel does a lot in their 6 episodes somehow.
Yeah, and they love their cameos.
Yes.
Like Disney Plus loves their cameos.
Yeah,
Right,
it's
the
like
You've
an
learned
end
anything.
Yeah,
The Moon
even the
Knight
end credit
changed the way
scene.
I thought about that because Moon Knight had nothing. It had like a reference
okay.
to Maripor, and it had like a reference to like the ancestral plane. But Moon Knight gave us nothing, so I'm wondering if it's going to be kind of similar.
They could. Well, I'm not sure. When they did end it on a very fun end credit scene, though, with a third identity reveal. If in case you guys can spoilers for Moon Knight, but
The
Jake
one?
Lockley, the Jake
Yeah,
Lockley,
yeah,
that was worth it. So I was okay with having
yeah, but
nothing
we
up
didn't
until
get
then.
like any kind of Marvel like tie-in, like MCU,
Oh,
no
yeah, true.
Shield, no,
That's true.
you know, Nick Fury. Nobody like showed up, so
True.
that one makes it because I was totally thinking
That's a
I
good
don't
point.
want to think that somebody's
Yeah.
going to show up in Miss Marvel and then they don't, and I'm somehow disappointed, even though it's like an amazing story, just because it didn't go the way I thought in my head. I don't know. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't
feel
think-
like. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go on.
I was thinking that Monica Rambeau was. I'm not sure where she is, but I'm not sure when Invasion comes out. So it's like they could tie it into any which way with the way the Phase 4 is going. So I feel like they have storylines, like they're working on storylines secretly. It's hard to see because there's just so much happening.
yeah, and I'm trying not to think too far into it, but I am curious. I am excited for it.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Carol Danvers shows up. Like surprised in the sense that like, oh wow, they're able to get her, you know. But because and possibly more so than although I guess I could see Monica show up. Kind of like as like that first step, you know, and then maybe culminating in like everyone seeing Carol and like the Marvels. But yeah, I think like until we maybe have a hint of what that storyline for the movie would be, you know, is it like, oh, they all come together and meet for the first time to defeat this person or not, you know, because they're in the comics with Kamala's run, there is the moment when she meets Carol Danvers for the first time. It's kind of like, I kind of like it that it's like different. And it was just like almost a casual, like, wait a second, what are you doing? So I kind of would like that like energy within the show that it's like, where are you here now? But in a good way that's very like,
I haven't read the comics.
Her. I wanted to ask you actually how they did it. So if you,
I can if you, I don't know if you want me to
tell us that.
Yeah, for sure.
So there's something going on in New Jersey. So, and I think it's like part of like a larger, like Marvel crisis that's happening, you know? And so like Kamala's like issue is tying in and it's like, okay, the world might be ending. And Kamala's just trying to like save her school essentially. And then, Captain Marvel shows up, like, you know, she's like trying to save cats and Captain Marvel shows up, you know, and is like, all right, kid, what are you doing? You know? And then, so it's kind of like the moment of like, oh my God, it's you, you're my hero. And then it's like, I stole your name. I hope that's okay. You know, like, so it's like a really cute, like kind of moment, but it's like, it's the end of the world. They don't know what's going to happen. You know, they think it's going to be the end of the world. Of course it's not because it continues. And so like, it's almost like a short meeting that they don't really have, you know, they do a very short like adventure together before they part ways again. You know, Captain Marvel has to go fix the global threat, you know, or intergalactic threat. Before they part ways, but it's kind of like finally getting that blessing from Carol. And so that's what I'm like, whenever that meeting is, whether it's in the show or in the movie, getting that moment between the two of them where it's just like, you know, you have my blessing sort of thing that like Kamala doesn't need that, but you know, she'll appreciate it no matter what. So
they could totally do that in the series. They could definitely like work that in somehow. Yeah. And that'd be great if we could.
I would love it.
That would be amazing.
So speaking of like, you know, where the series could go, where it could end, what do you think about the twist at the end of the second episode?
I have no idea because I'm not really sure what the story form is. Like, I'm not sure what her, like, I know she's like the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, but for Jersey. So this seems very international. So I'm surprised and very intrigued for sure.
I'm a little disappointed in this young man who seemed to have been having this adorable courting her in the sweetest of ways. And I was swooning for her. I loved their whole thing. And at the end, I was like, were you just lying to her to get close to her? I was like, you better not.
You jerking it out.
Yeah. I was not surprised. I think maybe a little bit biased there. And definitely projecting. But whenever a British attractive brown man that loves Shah Rukh Khan, there's something they're hiding. So it's like, this makes more sense. They're never this nice.
You're like, they're never this good to be true.
Yeah, because that was that is what we all wanted in high school, because there's this singer called Jay Sean. He's a British brown rapper, and that was literally the high school crush. And this guy is literally looks exactly like him. So that type of guy just doesn't walk in high school and start teaching you how to drive and going out on coffee dates and lying to your brother to cover for you. That doesn't exist. So this makes more sense. He's a secret spy. That makes so much more sense.
You're he can't be trusted.
Yeah, whenever he made that reveal, I was
And I am naive. I would have been. I was won over.
I mean, very fair. Very fair. It's definitely no, this is it's too good to be true. So maybe because I knew that was my fantasy growing up, that I was like, no, wait, this is wrong.
I've been reading my diary.
Yeah.
Whoever did it was wrong. This is not right.
Exactly. It did feel like my diary was being read. So I was like, wait, something's wrong. I need to wake up from my dream. And then I was like, oh, okay. It was a long con. I get it now.
Yeah, I'll be sad if something good, because I was just rooting for them. I was like, this is the cutest thing ever. I'm gonna be sad, you guys. I'm not over it.
What I don't understand is are they actually related then? Because wasn't he oh, this is my mom?
Okay, so who was she?
Isn't that the long lost sister?
I couldn't tell because I kept seeing. So I was confused with, when she's having those flashes and she's a person in it, somebody reaching out their hand. I couldn't really tell who that was, and I don't know.
I mean, I thought it was the same person. You may know better because I'm not sure if it's in the comics or not, but
I'm trying to remember. I do recall he can be a bit shady.
Okay.
So, but yeah, as far as I don't think they're related, but it's also one of those I think it's all the families kind of run in the same circle. All the aunties know each other, and I think that's kind of I'm guessing it's auntie, but not blood related auntie. It's
okay.
Yeah. Which for someone that is just white American, it's oh yeah, it's a very different thing, but it's oh, okay, nope, I get it now. It's yeah.
I think I'm still confused about the storyline of where the bangle came from, that whole story, and I'm assuming the lady has to do the bangle. So that is, I'm just guessing here.
There's secrets around those bangles. That's
okay.
And then her mom is clearly hiding something. Her mom,
for sure.
She didn't want her to have the bangles. She,
and her grandmother too.
I was thinking maybe it's a turning red situation.
Yeah, I thought that too. I got those vibes for sure.
Some kind of coming of age thing that they know is going to happen, and they're trying to shield her from it.
Oh my god, yes, I didn't make that. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Especially because the grandmother sent her the bangle too, so it's it feels like a family heirloom at the same time. But there's a lot of turning red vibes for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'm ready to uncover it. Give it to me, Marvel. What did you guys think of? Well, and I guess this, Maria, this more for you. What did you think about the way that they incorporated her culture and her religion into the show?
I think they did a very, very good job of it. It's one of those things that are very subtle, that it's there if you want to but it's not in your face about it. Her family is cute and they have her moments. Her brother's very religious, but she also listens to her. They see music and knows the movies. But it's also trying to figure out her identity in very subtle ways. when it comes to her parents and the costume they made, or discussing with Nadia like how she does it. And I really love that, like, because there's this whole like trying to figure out your Muslim identity, but also trying to figure out your Pakistani identity. And I think they do a very good job in addressing both, because they're very separate, but at the same time, there's a pressure to fit two different categories at the same time. And I don't know, it's a lot to like figure out about yourself. And she's definitely struggling in a way that's subtle. So I like it. I also loved the Eid scene and the second episode. That just reminded me so much of growing up whenever what we did with Eid at my mosque. I was really close to my little like Sunday school friends, or like my childhood friends, and they just reminded me so much of me and my friends growing up. I actually was texting them like, oh my God, you guys have to watch this. There's like the way they do Eid and the carnival is just so us. And I got a lot of feels and vibes for that. I love that they did that, and how they like showed all the like social circles and all the nicknames and the Illuminatis. It's like the best name ever for an auntie group. I cannot believe we have never thought about that. So that was that was like my favorite moment ever, because it's just like, it was so much of the culture and like the inside jokes, and that's also part of like the identity. And I just felt so seen. So I love that.
That makes me so happy to hear that, you know, you felt seen and that they did a good job, because I enjoyed it very much, and I would have been sad if it was like not appropriate in any way, you know?
Yeah.
But I thought those scenes were really great. They were so fun to watch. Like I said, I was smiling the whole time. Like this show had me smiling the whole time. So it makes me so happy to hear you say that, and that, you know, they did a good job. I do want to talk to you, Kristen, a little bit about the comics. What do you think of the live action adaptation of Ms. Marvel compared to her comic book counterpart?
Yeah, so there's like, kind of like I mentioned, like there are some differences, some subtle and some just like obviously the storyline's just going to be different. One, because like, well, I guess in both cases, right? Like in her comics run, like she's coming into this like decades established continuity of like, you know, many years of like Captain Marvel runs and several Captain Marvels. And how does that fit in? And how do the Immortals fit in? And how do the mutants fit in? You know, so she's entering this whole other world and establishing that world building within Jersey City, establishing Jersey City.
Yeah.
But then, you know, so it's like kind of, I think inevitably it is going to be different putting it into the MCU, because obviously the MCU has differed. It's not one-to-one to any of the comics. And it can't be, you know, because there's been so many iterations and just tweaks and changes over time. And so it's one of those, for me, because it's the first time that I've had the comics first and now the live action, that like I'm trying to stop myself from being like, oh, okay, that's different, or that's not how it happened. Because it's like, no, it's a completely different medium. It is entering in a completely different universe. And so it needs to stand on its own, and it needs to make its own thing. And the way that I feel I am with any sort of like book to movie adaptation, that I'm like, you have to look at them as distinct entities. You know, like when I loved the Harry Potter books and everything, you know, I still loved the movies. They were just very different, you know, and it's like, you could still love both, and you can still appreciate the slight tweaks to the stories that they've had. And so that's how I am with Ms. Marvel now. So it's like, there are some things that I'm like, oh, I wish we could have had this, but I was like, I still have that in the comics. That doesn't, you know, that doesn't change. Because one thing, and even just like with the art style of the comics, I always loved Adrian Alphonse's art, like in the first one. It's just fantastic, and really like kind of, for me, codifies her whole style. But like I always refer to it as like the like derp face. Like anytime where she's not like the focus, there's like just a like straight line, face of like characters in the background that I'm like it's the derp face. I'm like, we can't really get that in live action. But I love it. But like, you know, like the little tweaks of the things of like the winged sloth, like makes it into live action as like her plushie, and it's her sloth baby account, you know, that I'm like, it's just it's a fresh thing that for me, it's still exciting going through that. I'm like, okay, I have an idea of like what that character might be up to, or what might be coming next. but I really don't know because this is MCU Miss Marvel. The storyline will be different, and that's okay, and that's kind of great because it just means I get more Miss Marvel, and who can say no to that?
And I think we had this similar conversation during our Bridgerton discussion, because there was a lot of discourse on the internet around the fact that it's, you know, it's not page to page, or if you're somebody who just loves like the books or the comics or something, like I totally understand that you've been picturing it in your head for so long and you want to see a live action version of that. But sometimes it just doesn't translate well or doesn't fit into, like, for example, the current MCU. And I think then we even talked a little bit about when we interviewed during Endgame, like I'm pretty sure, yeah. When Endgame was about to come out, we interviewed Jim Starlin, who was the creator of Thanos, the character Thanos, and we asked him, like, you know, what do you think about the changes that they've made from the comic books? So, for example, when in the comics, when the Hulk,
it's not Josh Brolin. Sorry.
It is not. So like when the Hulk comes crashing into like Doctor Strange's, you know, house, in the comics it's Silver Surfer that comes crashing in and says, like, you know, Thanos is coming, and you know, in the MCU obviously it's the Hulk. And so we asked him, like, what do you think about these changes? And he'd be like, I'd be crazy to be upset. Like, you know, he was like, there's so much that goes into making movies and stories and things like that. There's so many cogs in the machine that there's no way that you can do a book to like movie, like perfect adaptation. And he's like, and you just have to kind of understand that, like, there's just no way that that's gonna happen. There's too many cogs in the machines. And he's like, and he said he wasn't upset about it. It was fine for him.
Especially in the MCU, it's so hard because I almost see MCU as something different than Marvel. It's like its own like series as well. Actually, I had a question because you've read the comic books. With with their power change in the Bangle, because I do love her original power because of the story that it brings with it, and like especially because it resonates in such a strong story, and I think that's why a lot of people are worried about the power change because they love that storyline. But I'm happy with the storyline as well because it shows a lot of potential. But I was just wondering, like, is it very different? Is the Bangle thing like something that you've heard of? Like, I was wondering how much was that new? Like, I'm just wondering what you thought about that.
I'm glad you brought that up. And I think that was part of Monica's plan for the podcast episode anyway. So
we haven't dynasty this whole time.
Like, tell me.
But so I think like the bangles have always been part of her costume, you know, kind of incorporating something, you know, of her home, of her history, of her culture. And I think like they were her grandmothers or great grandmothers. So it's always been part of the costume, but it was just kind of an accessory. I think Bruno might have fiddled with something to like give her a shield. I don't know. I can't remember. But you're right. Like her powers didn't come from these bangles. And I, like you, I had like the same kind of, you know, thought like others that it's like, well, I like the, you know, her original powers in the comics where it's like, it's, you know, it really is about her own body and she has all these controls, you know, and it's a little bit goofy, which I love that it's like, she could make a big, like, you know, she's like Elastigirl and like makes a big hand to catch people. Like it's just, it's a little bit goofy, but it's fun. But it also has like the potential that she can really like redo her whole body. She can look like Captain Marvel herself. And then, like you said, like, what does that mean in terms of finding her own identity and who she should be, that, while the powers have changed, and in some ways I'm like, not sure how I feel about that. It's still like, I think we're still exploring that story of her identity in other ways. Like it's not directly, it doesn't have to be because of her powers, which is again the whole story of Miss Marvel, that like she doesn't have to find herself because of her powers. And so I do like kind of the hints with these bangles, which really weren't mystical, I don't think, in the comics. So I'm really interested to see kind of how that plays out. And of course it does give like another parallel to Captain Marvel and Monica in terms of like the light powers, you know, and how that feeds off. So I think like just the look and the feel of that kind of power, it definitely connects her to Captain Marvel a bit more. But yeah, I'm kind of just really interested in seeing, which I imagine we'll learn over the course of the season, about the history of these Bangles and where did they come from, and who else might have been a
the family
superhero.
tie-in too, for sure. That's what I was wondering. I was like, is the family involved? Like, is her mother, like, is this like the whole grandmother turning red scenario a comic book thing? Because I was like, this is different, but I'm into it. So
it's like, it's hinted at. I think there was like one like story or issue that you kind of get to see like their, like one of her ancestors during the partition and everything, and kind of like where does this like latent immortal / mutant ability thing come through. But I have to say, in the comics, I was always kind of disappointed with that I was like, I almost wanted more, because they've always hinted like, oh yeah, like they've always had this potential for generations, and it just appeared in Kamala, so I am intrigued to see more of like, well, what could have been, what, and I think that's what we're going to see in the show, and that's what I want.
And I think like I'm also excited because so a lot of Bollywood actors are actually part of the Miss Marvel production. So I just have a feeling that they're definitely going to like incorporate there's just something happening. I can feel like there's a storyline brewing. And because like, why would they have so many extra like big name characters just like waiting? I know that one of them is supposed to play her grandfather. The other actor, I'm not sure what he's going to do. So like they wouldn't have like such a big character play her grandfather if it wasn't such a big part of the show. So I'm excited about what they're thinking.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Always look at the cast list.
Yeah. I mean, I was just shocked that like, because these actors are just, really, they're really dreamy and very simp-worthy. So whenever I heard that they were in Marvel, I was like, wait, what are my childhood crushes doing in this show? So that is why my ears perked up. But so did a lot of the South Asian community when they heard this.
That makes me so happy. One of the questions that I had about the Bangles was, and I don't know if this somehow ties in, but with Shang-Chi, with his bracelets, and the bracelets that Wenwu had, they were like centuries old, super old. They don't even know how old they were. And then the Eternals have these bracelets as well, right? And obviously they're not like, they're kind of artificial beings, the Eternals, but like they're still human, I guess, in a ways. But so my 10-year-old child, he speculates that he told me, like,
no, he's smart. There's
he
definitely a
told
connection
me,
there.
he said once, he was like, yeah, I can't wait to see, like, to find out where, like, when Wu got the bracelets from the Eternals. And I'm like, why would you think he got them from the Eternals? He was like, because it's 10 rings. He's like, and there's 10 Eternals. And I was like, oh. I'm like, it's not unlikely. I mean, that's just how it's been. So
I definitely think that's what's happening. I had this theory since like Shang-Chi, because the whole like, oh, we can't recognize his power, it's something old and all that stuff. I'm just like, oh my God, it's the Eternals. It has to be.
Yeah. And then so here's Miss Marvel also with like a very similar kind of like bracelet setup that's activating something that's already in her. Like, from what I understand, there was supposed to be Marvel was going to fork after Phase 4, right? We were going to get like space.
I can feel that.
Space MCU. We were going to get, our regular Earth MCU and stuff like that. So I'm really curious as to see like where the Eternals and Shang-Chi tie into all this, and Moon Knight as well. Like, it's a very godly thing going on with Moon Knight and stuff. So I think that in the next maybe 5 to 10 years, going into the 20th anniversary of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we will see an Endgame level event where all these things will culminate. That's just my guess, but
I can't even imagine that. I was going to point out that just like Shang-Chi too, there's like the family aspect too with Miss Marvel. There's also Kit Harington's character, Jon Snow.
Right.
At the end of Eternals, he also had like, I couldn't remember.
I thought you meant, I was like, wait, is Game of Thrones and MCU? Okay, I'm caught up. We're
he's
good.
still Jon Snow to me. Jon Snow had a sword that he got from his grandfather, and that seemed also very similar to like the ancient magic, and that's also a universe because I think Blade's in it. So like, yeah, there's a lot going on with Eternals that they built up, and they all have to do with magical artifacts given from family members. So it could be they could be in the same storyline for sure.
I'm excited to see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Especially with this Marvel tie-in.
Yeah, because I think the Shang-Chi, the rings might have been actual rings in the comics.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe, don't quote me on that, but I feel like they did change them to kind of maybe to make it look cooler or more obvious on film. But I'm like, well, maybe it's one of those. Is that why they kind of shifted the storyline for Kamala to making it coming out of, in terms of kind of tying, and when you have the Marvel Cinematic Universe, making that a really cohesive in a way that it's a little trickier with comics, right? Where it's I can't keep track. I just
look at us
understand.
like a bunch of conspiracy theorists.
Yeah, we need a whiteboard and to write it all down.
It's like that meme where it's like, yes, see,
yeah, no, really.
To be on the fly on the wall of the Marvel retreat that just happened, like, supposedly they were going to map out the next 10 years or something. So,
oh my God, I would love to see that map.
I would like to just sit there in the background, just like, I promise I won't tell nobody. Let me just listen.
Join the catering.
I will sign the NDA. I just need to know.
Won't tell anyone.
Okay, so before we wrap up, do you guys have any final thoughts? Anything that we didn't talk about that you want to throw in? Make sure that we mention.
Oh, there's so much, but I'm just excited. I feel like I think it's gonna be very different from all the other MCU series, but in a good way. Mm-hmm. So I just like hearing you talk about how it's different from the comic books, but you still enjoy and love it, and are so positive about it. I just hope like that's what the general audience feels, because like I know that this project means a lot to me because of like all the stuff that it represents, and like just the fact that her storyline, just the fact that there's a Pakistani brown girl from Jersey and who loves daydreaming, that is part of the MCU, is like such a huge step in my opinion, and I just can't believe the story even exists. So I'm just excited that we're part of the MCU, and I just want the series to do well so it can continue to grow, and to be open-minded with like what this means for the MCU, because it may not be Moon Knight or like, Loki, but it doesn't need to be. Exactly. Yeah. And it's great.
It can be its own thing.
Exactly. So, yeah.
I don't think I can add anything to the brilliance of what you just said. So I'm not even going to try, except just to say, like you, I mean, I am just excited to see the whole rest of the show. And yeah, I'm sure I will want more by the end of it. So.
Yeah. Obviously we watched this about a week and a half, 2 weeks before it aired. So I just kind of am really hoping that the reception for it is what is big. I hope that it's well received. I hope people love it. I hope it's not a Moses Ingram situation that we saw at, with the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, because this has been so much fun and so enjoyable to watch these first 2 episodes. And like, I just want the happiness to keep going, and I just want the positivity to keep going. And it's so great to be able to talk to you guys about it, because, we still have another week before this episode is out to the general public. So, I'm just really excited to be able to talk about it. And I hope that excitement continues. And I hope we have lots of conversations about this and in positive lights.
Agreed.
For sure.
All right, guys. Well, this is going to wrap up this episode of the Temple of Geek podcast. We want to thank everybody who tuned in today, but especially my 2 guests. Thank you guys for being here with us. It was so much fun to talk to you guys. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to hit us up on Facebook or Twitter using the handle Temple of Geek. Do you want to check out some of our other episodes or shows? Why don't you head on over to templeofgeek.com. There you will find all sorts of content that pertains to the world of geek.